Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. The presidency recently described its decision to comply with the rule of law in releasing former National Security Advisor, retired Colonel Sowore Dasuki, and the convener of Revolution Now, Sowore, as an important lesson. The Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity, Malam Garba Shehu, who said this, also added that the federal government may appeal against the court judgments that granted bail to the retired colonel and the publisher of Sahara Reporters. Shehu stated this in an interview with newsmen in Abuja on Tuesday, while reacting to the presidential directive on the release of Dasuki and Sowore.
Well, now the DSS had initially refused to release Sowore, who had been granted bail by 2 different courts. And earlier this month, he was temporarily released after 124 days in detention, but forcefully rearrested at the Federal High Court in Abuja, less than 24 hours after his release. And joining us now to discuss this and more is human rights lawyer and executive director, Citizens Advocacy for Social and Economic Rights, Frank Tietie. Good morning.
Frank, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
Are
morning.
you with us, Frank? Well, I mean, it's probably not ready yet, but it will be interesting to have his take on the release of Sowore and Colonel Sowore Dasuki retired. The government has said this is like some kind of Christmas gift for Nigerians, and many Nigerians have commended the government. But there are other Nigerians who are quite skeptical.
And upset at the same time.
Yes.
Because it's like, how is this a gift if this is something that should have happened a long time ago? So now, are we applauding the government for doing what they should do when they don't do it? I mean, is that where we are now, where we now say, thank you, even if this is something you should have done ever since, but thank you. You know, it's like those. It's a very, very annoying situation for a lot of people at the same time, but still grateful, still very grateful.
Well, particularly with the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice now saying that his office has the absolute respect for the judiciary.
Yeah.
You know, and the fact that what is conveyed, what is communicated, is the fact that, look, this government gives the impression that it chooses to obey court orders, not when the courts give the orders, but when and if it is convenient for it to do so.
Thank you.
So if indeed, the government believes in the rule of law, at the point the orders were given, especially in the case of Colonel Dasuki, they should have obeyed the courts. I mean, even the courts awarded, damages in favor of Colonel Dasuki. That was ignored. He went to the West African Court of Justice. That was ignored. And we just had that rigmarole. But, well, as they say, maybe all is well that ends well. But, of course, this does not amount to a withdrawal of the cases against the 2 gentlemen. The Attorney General makes it clear that they should respect the terms of their bail and that, the federal government will continue with the case.
A lot of questions remain unanswered. Dr. Bati, as we do know, the Constitution recognizes and mentions the Minister of Justice. Out of all the appointments of the President, the Minister of Justice is recognized and mentioned in the Constitution, and he has the powers to take over any case instituted by any other agency of government. He also has that powers by the Constitution to discontinue any of these cases. So at what point did the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation realize that he had that power? Because you would recall that just last week, he had said he could not take unilateral decisions to release Sowore without recourse to the courts. I wonder if he eventually had that recourse to the courts before making these decisions. A lot of questions remain unanswered for me in this situation.
Well, but you know also that the 2 cases, these 2 major cases involving Dasuki and Sowore, had become political and had become international. And with global outrage and local outrage, the government needed to take a decision to, change the narrative, to save the face of government. I think it's a face-saving thing because it had become a major source of embarrassment and disgrace to the Nigerian government. But too little, too late, that is what it looks like. But the lawyers involved in the cases, Michael Zekume on one hand and Femi Falana, SAN on the other hand, have both said, look, government should go further. Even civil society groups, the CSOs, the 200 CSOs that picketed the offices of the National Human Rights Commission on Monday, they are also saying, look, it's not just these two persons. All illegally detained persons should also be released, including Agba Jalingo and Daddy Yatta, and every other journalist that may be, or human rights activist, or any prisoner of conscience that may be in detention under the authority of the incumbent government of Nigeria. Michael Zekume and Falana have also said, look, the case of Zazaki and his wife, Zainat, of the Islamic movement of Nigeria is also similar, and they too should also be released, even if they still have to face their case in court, have their day in court. And there are those who are saying, look, the Attorney General, you were referring to his powers. The strongest power that he has is that of entering a non-le prosequi, that is to withdraw cases. And some people have even said, look, the cases should even be withdrawn. But we'll see what happens, and when Frank Tietie shows up on the screen from our Abuja studio, we would like to have his own input as someone who... Are you with us? Good morning.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Yes, welcome to the morning show, and thank you for coming. I mean, on Boxing Day, I'm sure you have 1,001 other things that you would like to do. So Merry Christmas to you, and we hope you enjoy Boxing Day when you leave the studio. But we've been talking about the release of Colonel Sowore and Dasuki and Omoyele Sowore. What's your take? Do you think that Nigerians should be grateful to the Attorney General of the Federation and the federal government, and that, will you consider this a nice Christmas gift with which, the Buhari administration has tried to change the narrative?
Well, thank you, and Merry Christmas. Certainly not. It's not a gift, and it is nothing very exciting, except that they have just realized that the tactic of instilling fear in persons who can be vociferous or in trying to, ride roughshod of the law, that tactic hasn't worked. Rather, it has brought a backlash of disappointment and, something that is also disgraceful to us as a country. We've put our sovereignty in the sovereignty in doubt, and the legitimacy of a government, an action of a government that should actually set an example. So it's all true. It has been very, very disappointing. Yes, we must appreciate and acknowledge the helplessness of the Nigerian populace, even human rights defenders like me, and generally we thought that there was really nothing that could be done when an executive has decided to disregard the very law that gives it legitimacy. It destroyed a very important constitutional culture that we've been taking time to build since 1999. So what has happened is that the government is simply retracing its step, and it will have a lot to regret for what it has done, for the kind of misdirection that it has taken. I believe that the president and all of those statements regarding subjecting human rights to national security misguided and misadvised. But unfortunately, that was where we were.
I'd like to ask you, Mr. Tietie, the role of the chief law officer of the land, and that's the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of the Federation, whose primary assignment is to protect the rights of every Nigerian citizen. How would you describe his role so far under this administration, considering all these cases? And some would say these are just the popular cases we hear about, talking about the Sowore, the Dasukis, the Zazakis. There are many others. How would you describe Mr. Malami's role so far?
Disappointing, because when you see his role has been disappointing, let me say it expressly. When you see the immense powers, and also when you consider his pedigree as a senior advocate of Nigeria, and to think that Section 150 of the Constitution appoints him as an Attorney General of the Federation, and simply makes an additional requirement that he shall be or he must be a minister of government, not necessarily minister of justice anyway. But to think that he is a repository of the will, the true intention of the law, and that all of these misadventures and misapplication of the law have been happening under his watch becomes a very disappointing thing. I was at the Supreme Court one day, and Abubakar Malami, SAN, strolled in before the, before the Legal Practitioners Privileges Committee. I mean, how could that happen? The Attorney General is such an exalted figure in our constitutional democracy. He is a man that should be without fault when it comes to the law. So it's difficult to understand that we had a situation where court orders were given regarding, let me tell you, there is a pretentious way, a positive pretentious manner in which government is operated that guarantees order. That is the all-powerful executive that controls the army and all the apparatus of force of the state, pretends to subject itself under the direction of law so that there can be order. But what we had is that a culture of disorder was beginning to creep in. You know, imagine traffic laws were being disregarded, tax laws were being disregarded, all forms of laws, and then we were gradually, and we were getting to the end of a state of an anomy. And that was the result of the fact that we were supposed to be guided by the best. And the Attorney General of the Federation is actually Attorney General of the Federation and not Attorney General of the federal government. So he didn't quite do well in allowing all of these things to happen. But I'm happy that he had the opportunity to redeem himself, because what about if this directive had come from another quarter other than the Attorney General? So what message would have been sent?
We're going to have to just briefly cut you short there, but when we get back from this quick break, we'll listen to what more you have to say and, of course, ask you a few more questions. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the morning show. We still have human rights lawyer and executive director, Citizens Advocacy for Social and Economic Rights, Mr. Frank Tietie. Now, Mr. Frank, I'd like to bring up the concept of separation of powers here. We all understand the concept is that every arm of the government, talking about the executive, legislative, judiciary, gets to function on its own. However, there are provisions where the executive creeps into the affairs of the judiciary. Now, I'd like to ask, do you think this particular part of the Constitution has been oversaturated, looking at the events that have taken place in the case of Omoyele Sowore?
Well, we practice a presidential federalist constitutional democracy, and there is clear separation of powers. The executive has the kind of powers it does have because it has a lot more to do, because the goal of government is to simply cater to the welfare of the people and maintain a law and order, public order. Now, what the government has done, particularly in the case of Sowore, has been destructive and threatened the foundation of our country, which means that we look at the report. The report is that a court gives an order which is sacrosanct, and then an agency of the government now goes into the court, violates that order, violates the sacredness of the court, picks up Sowore, chases away a judge that represents judiciary. Now, don't forget, this pattern has been on for a long time. Now, even when the former Chief Justice of Nigeria was hounded out of office, that's how it started. It started, let's go a little backwards. It started when the judges' homes were invaded. Now, so far back as 2016. So it means that the idea of disregard for the judiciary, of course, when you consider the legislature, it understands that it is more powerless, because before now and even now, where we now have its leadership saying that it is going to be a cooperative leadership, that it's not expected in any way to antagonize the executive. So that simply portends a level of tyranny. It may be novel, but it will not only be destructive to our constitutional culture, but it will make us unprogressive. It will make the government not to even achieve anything, and it will make us a laughingstock. What has happened now is that our sovereignty has also been checked in a situation where the ordinary Nigerian believes that it was because the American government decided to weigh in the Sowore's matter. That's why they speedily decided to obey an order of court. You don't forget that it means that our government, which ought not to be subjected to any external pressure, which ought not to be subjected to any external force that is higher than it, now appears to be afraid of another government. And that's why I said the principle, the tactic of threatening the people, because if you see what has happened to Dasuki and then Sowore particularly Sowore, is simply to send out a signal to others like him who dare to, speak out their minds, who dare to exercise their right to either Section 40 to freedom of associate, or to freely to associate, or Section 39 to freely speak their mind, just to send a threatening message to them. That's why they needed to deal with Sowore in such a manner. And that's a lazy approach, we have always said. The better approach is to rise up to the standards that the law has set. Now, what stopped them from the outset, from inviting Sowore that, look, we perceive that your revolution now, protest, even though it's legitimate, you have a right to it, we perceive that from the reports that we have, it might be damaging. Let's discuss. That ought to have, we lost an opportunity, and we keep losing opportunities to get civilized when all these things come up. So, particularly with regards to Sowore, this government missed it. Its tactic has not worked. The civil society has become more emboldened, even though, out of respect for order, there hasn't been any form of uprising. But we do know that nobody has actually been calm or threatened by all of this tactic.
If I may interrupt you here, Frank, I don't know whether you are aware of a statement that has been issued by Garuba Shehu. Garuba Shehu says that, look, the international media is giving the impression that Sowore was arrested because he's a journalist, and that this is a case of the violation of his freedom of speech. But that instead, he was arrested because he was calling for revolution and seeking to overthrow the government of President Muhammadu Buhari. And that in his view, no government, no responsible government should fold its arms if anyone is threatening to cause this destabilization. I'd like to have your response to that. And then secondly, what is the guarantee that Sowore in particular will respect the terms, the bail conditions that he was given? Because you recall that the Attorney General referred to that he and Colonel Dasuki are expected to respect the terms of their bail. But when Sowore came out, yes, he didn't grant an interview. He hasn't granted a full interview yet. But he was said to have shouted "Revolution now" after he came out. And also yesterday he was on Instagram, wishing his followers Merry Christmas. Would that not amount to a violation of the conditions of his bail?
Well, you see, we have what we refer to as criminal procedure, and at the federal level, it is governed by the Administration of Criminal Justice Act. Now, how does one say revolution now amounts to treason, or an intention that he wants to protest against bad governance? How does that amount to treason? And if you, as a law enforcement agent, you perceive with your superior understanding of the polity that this could likely lead to breakdown of law and order, would you first of all move for an arrest? Why then do we have provisions for summons? Was Sowore summoned? You think the power to arrest is just exercised anyhow? It is exercised only when you see someone in course of committing a crime, or when the person has defied or disregarded a summons. Did the DSS summon Sowore? Was there a warning? As we've had it, even the FC team. Sadly, the elite security body, which is the DSS, we should have operated with higher standards, seems to be falling short. Because in the FCT here, the police, if people like us, when we want to go on protest, we ask the police as a matter of right to come and protect us, because we know that the protest could be hijacked. And then you find the Commissioner of Police through the PRO of the FCT Police Command advising us that, look, we can't guarantee security. It will not help. It will be against the current state of affairs. There is going to be inauguration tomorrow. Why do you carry a protest now? It will be hijacked, and we cannot handle it. The police will not. So the police has become bit more civil in relating to civil society than even a more elite security outfit like the DSS, going to, in a Gestapo manner, to go and invade a hotel, to picture I don't want to sound like a broken record. The idea is simply instill fear in the people. How do you govern by fear in the civil, a constitutional democracy, in a civil rule? It won't work. You are simply going to embolden your enemies. So I'll address the issue, or I did listen to Garba Shehu on that matter, but you know that that is not correct. The point is this: the man is simply it's in a class of his own. We Nigerians, we know the truth, but a number of us have been afraid. We know the gargantuan powers of the state. And we are saying that they are being abused. Those powers are being abused. The state, with all of these powers, operated through the government, must subject itself to law, must operate in such a manner that it is accountable to the people, that to whom belongs sovereignty. But when it begins to operate as self-serving, as if it's law unto itself, in the way and manner it has treated Sowore, to the extent that even when it was charged to court, granted bail, it decided to reinterpret, to constitute itself into a judiciary. These things, you are not helping Nigeria in the long run. You may have your way now because you control force, but you are simply laying a very bad foundation, which will in turn come to haunt you. Unfortunately, they saw, I would say fortunately, they saw it coming, because we know how weak our system is. We know how weak we are, that we know how much of our public officials who make almost all their investments abroad, who rely on either the West or on Dubai, the central economy. So sanctions were coming against them. They were already prepared for them.
Very briefly, if you can, in your response, I want to ask you about the agents in the eye of the storm here, the DSS. It is a product of the law, but do you think that the DSS has become too powerful? And is there willful blindness on the part of the presidency to allow this go unchecked?
I will answer you briefly, but let me just say this. The truth about it is that when Sowore makes, how do you want to deprive him of his humanity, that he shouldn't speak, nobody should capture him on camera or on phone or whatever. You know, he has a right to express himself, and I don't think he has breached the bail terms. But now, coming to the DSS, a creation of a statute, a National Assembly statute, which I have always expected that it should be amended before now as a result of its excesses. The intention, the way it was abused under the military when it was NSO, we should have seen a situation, and I saw under the Goodluck Jonathan administration that there was a bit of some civilizing element about the DSS. But as a creation of law, the operators have mismanaged it, they have abused it, and I expect that the National Assembly should quickly amend that law. And in fact, I have also called several times that the DSS should be scrapped, because it's not necessary. The police can do a better job if it is well equipped.
Thank you very much,
Gestapo operation where you find that the citizens are afraid.
Thank you very much, Frank Tietie. I know it's a very passionate subject, but we'll have to, close the conversation here until another time.